This happened during my final year of college. At the time, I was renting a small house on the outskirts of town. Most students lived in apartments closer to campus, but I preferred having my own space. The house wasn't anything special. It was old, had creaky floors, and sat at the end of a dead-end road surrounded by woods. The nearest neighbor was about 200 yards away. Normally, I loved the privacy. After what happened, I never looked at that house the same way again. It was late October, and my roommates had both gone home for the weekend. One was visiting family, and the other had gone to a football game several hours away. That left me completely alone. Friday night started normally. I ordered pizza, played video games, and stayed up far later than I should have. Around midnight, I let my dog Cooper outside. Cooper was a German Shepherd mix. He was usually fearless. The kind of dog that would run toward a problem instead of away from it. When I opened the back door, he stepped outside, then immediately stopped. His ears went straight up. He stared toward the woods. I waited for him to run into the yard. Instead, he slowly backed into the house. That was unusual. I walked onto the porch and looked toward the tree line. Nothing, no movement, no sounds. The woods were completely dark. Eventually, I convinced myself he had probably seen a deer. I shut the door and forgot about it. About an hour later, I was lying in bed, scrolling through my phone, when I heard something outside. A metallic sound, almost like someone lightly tapping on metal. Tap, tap, tap. I sat up and listened. The sound continued for maybe 30 seconds before stopping. I figured it was probably a branch hitting something. The wind had picked up. I went back to bed. The next morning I woke up around 9. When I stepped outside with Cooper, I immediately noticed something strange. My trash cans had been moved. Normally they sat beside the garage. Now they were sitting near the edge of the woods. At first I thought maybe strong winds pushed them. Then I realized they were both upright. Perfectly upright. Someone had physically moved them. I dragged them back and tried not to think about it. That night was when things got worse. Around 10 p.m. I was watching a movie in the living room. Cooper was asleep beside the couch. Suddenly he jumped up. Not slowly. Not curiously. He exploded to his feet. He ran to the front window and started barking. I muted the TV. My heart immediately started racing. I pulled back the curtain. The front yard was empty. At least, that's what I thought. Then I noticed something. Near the mailbox. Someone was standing there. A tall figure. Completely still. Just standing at the edge of my property. I froze. The figure wasn't moving. It looked like they were staring directly at the house. For several seconds, neither of us moved. Then the figure slowly walked away into the darkness. I immediately locked every door in the house. I barely slept that night. The next morning, I called my roommate Jake. He laughed and said it was probably someone cutting through the woods. I wanted to believe him. Unfortunately, things continued. Monday evening, I came home from class around 6. The first thing I noticed was my gate. It was open. I always kept it closed. Always, I checked around the property. Nothing seemed missing. Nothing seemed broken. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been there. That night, I decided to leave an outdoor light on. Around 2 and I woke up needing water. As I walked toward the kitchen, I glanced out the back window and nearly dropped my glass. Someone was standing in my backyard. They were close, maybe 20 feet from the house. Just standing there, looking toward my window. I immediately ducked down. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped my phone while dialing 911. When I looked back outside, the figure was gone. Police arrived 15 minutes later. They searched the property. Nothing, no footprints. No signs of forced entry. No suspects. One officer suggested it might be a prank. I wasn't convinced. The following night was the worst. Around midnight, the power suddenly went out. The entire house went dark. I checked my phone. No weather alerts. No storms. Nothing. Just darkness. I grabbed a flashlight and walked through the house. Everything seemed normal. Then Cooper started growling. The sound came from deep in his chest. He was staring toward the kitchen. I slowly pointed my flashlight in that direction. Nothing. Then I heard a sound. A faint scraping noise coming from outside, near the back door. Scrape, 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 like something dragging across wood. I didn't move. Neither did Cooper. The noise continued for several minutes, then stopped. A few seconds later came 3 knocks. Slow, deliberate, knock, knock, knock. Every hair on my body stood up. I called 911 again. The dispatcher stayed on the line while officers headed toward my house. While waiting, I heard footsteps outside. Someone was walking around the house. Slowly, almost casually, as if they knew I couldn't see them. The footsteps moved past the kitchen window, then the living room, then the front porch. My pulse was pounding so hard I could hear it. Suddenly, Cooper lunged toward the front door, barking violently. Then came another knock. This time louder. Much louder. The doorknob rattled. Whoever was outside was trying to get in. I backed away and grabbed the heaviest thing I could find. A metal fireplace poker. The doorknob rattled again. Then again, the dispatcher kept telling me officers were almost there. It felt like hours. Finally, I saw flashing lights through the front window. The footsteps outside immediately stopped. Police searched the property. Again, nothing. But this time, they found something. Behind my garage, tucked between 2 trees, they found a sleeping bag, several empty water bottles, food wrappers, and binoculars. Someone had apparently been staying there, watching the house, watching me. The officers believed whoever had been stalking me saw the police arrive and escape through the woods. I spent the rest of the night at a friend's apartment. A few days later, one of the officers called me. Apparently, a man had been arrested several towns away. He matched descriptions from multiple stalking complaints. When police searched his vehicle, they found photographs of houses, including mine. To this day, I don't know exactly what his intentions were, and honestly, I don't want to know. What scares me most is realizing how long he had probably been watching me before I ever noticed him. Sometimes I still think about that figure standing near the mailbox, completely still, watching the house, waiting, and if Cooper hadn't alerted me every time something was wrong, I have no idea how that story might have ended. Happened in 2023 when I was 27 years old. At the time, I worked as a night auditor at a small hotel about 30 minutes outside the city. The schedule wasn't ideal, but the pay was decent, and I had gotten used to sleeping during the day and staying awake all night. The only downside was that I lived alone. My apartment sat on the second floor of an older building that only had 6 units. Most of the tenants were elderly people who kept to themselves. It was usually quiet, which was exactly why I rented the place. For almost 2 years, nothing unusual ever happened there. Then, one weekend changed everything. It started on a Friday morning after I got home from work. I parked my car, climbed the stairs, and unlocked my apartment. The moment I stepped inside, something felt off. I couldn't immediately explain why. Everything looked normal. The furniture was where I left it. Nothing appeared damaged, yet I had this strange feeling that somebody had been inside. I checked every room. Nothing. Eventually I convinced myself I was tired and overthinking things. I went to bed. When I woke up around 5 p.m., I noticed something strange. My bathroom light was on. I never left it on. In fact, I was obsessive about turning lights off before going to sleep. I stared at the glowing light from the hallway. For a moment, I wondered if I had simply forgotten. After all, I had just worked a 10-hour shift. People make mistakes. I turned it off and left for work. The next morning, I returned home exhausted. This time, I noticed something different. A kitchen cabinet was open. Just one. Again, not impossible to explain. Maybe I had left it open. Maybe I was more tired than I realized. Still, the feeling in my stomach continued growing. Before going to sleep, I checked the entire apartment carefully. Everything looked secure. Every window was locked. Every door was locked. I finally fell asleep around 9 a.m. Several hours later, I woke up suddenly. At first, I wasn't sure why. The room was quiet. Then, I heard it. A sound coming from the living room. It sounded like someone lightly tapping their fingers against the table. Tap, tap, tap. The sound continued for several seconds, then stopped. I sat completely still, listening, nothing. Eventually, I got out of bed. The apartment was empty. The tapping never happened again. That night, I mentioned everything to my coworker Marcus. He laughed. "You watch too many horror movies," he told me. Maybe he was right. I wanted him to be right. Unfortunately, things became impossible to ignore the following night. I got home around 7 a.m. As soon as I entered the apartment, I noticed the smell. It wasn't strong, just faint, almost like cigarette smoke. The strange thing was that I didn't smoke. Neither did any of my neighbors. The smell seemed strongest near the hallway closet. I opened the closet door. Nothing, just jackets, shoes, and storage boxes. Still, the smell bothered me. I checked the rest of the apartment before finally going to sleep. Around noon, I woke up because I heard footsteps. Actual footsteps. Not creaking, not pipes. Footsteps. I immediately sat up. The sound lasted only 2 seconds before stopping. My heart began racing. I slowly walked into the hallway. Everything was quiet. Every room was empty. I checked under beds, inside closets. Everywhere, nothing. By this point, I was seriously considering installing cameras. That evening, I stopped by an electronics store and bought 2 small indoor security cameras. One faced the living room, the other faced the hallway. I set them up before leaving for work. The next morning, I reviewed the footage. At first, everything looked normal. The apartment remained empty for hours. Then, around 1:17 p.m., something happened. I watched in disbelief as the hallway camera suddenly lost connection. The screen froze. 10 minutes later, it came back online. I checked the living room camera. It had disconnected during the exact same period. My stomach dropped. Maybe it was a technical issue. Maybe, but it felt like more than that. That afternoon, I decided to stay awake. I wanted answers. Around 2 p.m., I was sitting quietly on my couch when I heard a noise from the hallway. A soft scraping sound, like fabric rubbing against a wall. I stood up. The sound stopped instantly. Then, I noticed something. The hallway closet door was slightly open. I was positive it had been closed earlier. Slowly, I walked toward it. The closer I got, the harder my heart pounded. I reached for the handle, then froze. There was movement inside. Just a tiny movement, but enough. I stumbled backward and immediately called 911. The dispatcher told me to leave the apartment immediately. I didn't argue. I ran outside and waited near the parking lot. Within minutes, police arrived. 3 officers entered the apartment. I watched from outside. A few moments later, I saw one officer escorting a man out in handcuffs. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. The man looked filthy. His clothes were dirty. His beard was overgrown. He looked like he hadn't showered in weeks. One of the officers later explained everything. The man had been living inside my apartment. At first I thought he was joking. Then he showed me how. Behind the hallway closet was a maintenance access panel connected to unused storage space between units. The space was large enough for a person to hide inside. Apparently, the man had been entering my apartment while I slept during the day. He would come out when he thought I was asleep or away at work. He had been stealing small amounts of food and water. That's why things kept moving. That's why lights were turning on. That's why cabinets were opening. Police found blankets, empty food containers, cigarette butts, and even a small flashlight hidden inside the maintenance area. The officer estimated he had been staying there for weeks. The realization hit me like a truck. Every strange feeling I'd had was real. Every noise, every open cabinet, every unexplained smell. Someone had actually been living inside my apartment. The most disturbing part came later. When officers reviewed the camera footage more carefully, they discovered something I wish I never knew. The man had emerged from the hidden space several times while I was sleeping. In one clip, he stood in my bedroom doorway for nearly 2 minutes, just watching me. Not moving, not speaking, just staring. I moved out less than a week later. I broke my lease and never went back. Even now, years later, I still check every closet whenever I move into a new place. Because once you've learned that a stranger was secretly living only a few feet away from you every day, you never really feel completely safe again. This happened last year, and it's easily the most terrifying experience of my life. Even now, I still have trouble sleeping if I'm home alone. At the time, I was 31 years old and working remotely for a software company. My wife, Emily, worked as a traveling nurse, which meant she was occasionally away from home for several days at a time. Usually, I enjoyed having the house to myself. I could stay up late, play games, watch movies, and enjoy the quiet. After this happened, that quiet became something I hated. It started during one of Emily's week-long assignments. She left on a Monday morning. The first 2 days were completely normal. Nothing strange happened. Nothing felt unusual. Then, Wednesday night arrived. I was downstairs watching TV when I received a motion alert from one of our outdoor security cameras. I checked the notification. The camera overlooking our backyard had detected movement. At first I assumed it was a raccoon or a stray cat. The camera picked up animals all the time. When I opened the footage, however, I immediately felt uneasy. The recording showed a person. A man. He appeared at the edge of the camera frame near the fence. The strange thing was that he wasn't doing anything. He wasn't trying to enter the yard. He wasn't walking through. He was simply standing there, watching the house. The footage lasted about 15 seconds before he walked out of frame. I replayed it several times. Something about it felt wrong. Maybe it was the way he stood completely still. Maybe it was the fact that I couldn't see his face. Whatever it was, I didn't like it. I checked the rest of the cameras. Nothing. The front yard was empty. The driveway was empty. Only that one brief clip existed. I locked every door and tried to forget about it. The following night, another motion alert appeared. This time, the notification came shortly after midnight. Again, it was the backyard camera. My stomach immediately tightened. I opened the recording. The same man was there. At least I think it was the same man. The footage was dark and blurry. He stood in nearly the exact same spot, facing the house, not moving, not doing anything, just watching. This time he remained there for almost a full minute before walking away. I barely slept that night. The next morning I contacted the local police department. An officer reviewed the footage. Unfortunately, there wasn't much they could do. The man hadn't trespassed, he hadn't damaged anything, he hadn't committed a crime. The officer advised me to stay alert and call immediately if I noticed anything else. That evening, I installed additional cameras around the property. I also left several lights on throughout the night. For 2 days, everything seemed normal again. No alerts, no strange visitors, nothing. I started convincing myself it was probably some random person cutting through the neighborhood. Then, Saturday happened. Around 8 p.m., I ordered food and settled onto the couch. At approximately 9:30, somebody knocked on my front door. 3 slow knocks. Not aggressive, not loud, just enough to get my attention. I looked through the peephole. Nobody was there. I opened the door and checked outside. The street was empty. The sidewalk was empty. There wasn't a single person in sight. I shut the door and locked it. Less than 5 minutes later, another knock came. This time from the back door. I nearly jumped off the couch. Nobody ever used the back door. Nobody. I grabbed my phone and slowly walked toward the kitchen. The back porch light illuminated the entire area. When I looked through the glass, I didn't see anyone. The porch was empty. The yard was empty. The knock never came again. Needless to say, I was nervous. I double-checked every lock and tried distracting myself with a movie. Around midnight, I finally went upstairs. I was brushing my teeth when my phone buzzed. Another motion alert. Backyard camera. My heart sank. I opened the footage. The man was back. Only this time he wasn't standing near the fence. He was standing much closer, about 20 feet from my house. I immediately checked the live feed. The camera showed nothing. He was gone. I called the police again. An officer drove through the area but didn't find anybody. Sunday morning arrived without incident. I remember feeling relieved. Emily would be home the following afternoon. I only had one more night alone. That night I decided to stay awake later than usual. Around 1 a.m. I was sitting in the living room when all the power suddenly went out. The TV shut off. The lights disappeared. The entire house fell into darkness. At first I thought it was a neighborhood outage. Then I looked outside. The houses across the street still had power. Only my house was dark. A feeling of dread immediately washed over me. I grabbed a flashlight and checked the breaker panel in the basement. Everything appeared normal. Nothing was tripped. As I stood there trying to understand what was happening, I heard a sound upstairs. A loud thud, followed by another. Then silence. Every instinct told me not to go upstairs. Unfortunately, I was alone. Nobody else was going to check. I slowly climbed the staircase. The house felt completely different without electricity. Every shadow seemed darker. Every creak sounded louder. When I reached the second floor, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. My bedroom door was closed. I always left it open. Always, I stared at it for several seconds, trying to convince myself there was a logical explanation. Maybe air pressure had moved it. Maybe I accidentally shut it earlier. I reached for the handle. The moment I touched it, I heard movement inside the room. A shuffle. Then another. Someone was in there. I immediately backed away. My entire body went cold. I quietly retreated down the stairs and called 911. The dispatcher instructed me to leave the house immediately. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my keys and ran outside. As soon as I reached my driveway, I looked toward the second floor bedroom window and froze. A silhouette was standing inside, watching me. The figure didn't move, didn't wave, didn't react, just stood there. Staring, police arrived within minutes. Several officers entered the house. I waited outside, shaking uncontrollably. After what felt like forever, one officer approached me. His expression told me everything before he even spoke. Someone had been inside. The intruder escaped through a rear window moments before officers reached the bedroom. But that wasn't the worst part. While searching the room, police discovered a backpack hidden beneath my bed. Inside were water bottles, food, a flashlight, extra clothes, and several photographs. Photographs of my house, my car, my backyard, even pictures of me. Some were taken weeks earlier. Others appeared to have been taken only days before. The officers believed the man had been stalking me for quite some time. They also believed he had likely entered the house on multiple occasions before that night. The power outage wasn't accidental either. Someone had deliberately cut power to the house from an exterior utility box. Despite a massive search effort, the man was never identified. Emily and I moved less than 2 months later. To this day, I still check security cameras obsessively. I still look out windows whenever I hear a strange sound at night. And every once in a while, I remember seeing that silhouette standing in my bedroom window, watching me from inside my own house. And I honestly don't think I'll ever completely get over it.